last week they lost 7,000, between the two countries, 7,313 soldiers, to be somewhat exact, for no reason whatsoever. And they're Russian and they're Ukrainian, but they're soldiers. But they're soldiers. But they're soldiers.
Hello, and I'd like to welcome you back to the NexaVision. If you missed our first episode about Gaza, I'd highly encourage you to check that out. I really didn't want to find myself in a position to defend the Palestinians. I want to stay neutral, but sometimes choosing the good path is not always the easiest path. But in this episode, I really want to talk about my own personal experiences with the veteran system and the VA, Veterans Affairs, and their evaluations and their for-profit mechanisms, looking at the money streams and following those money streams. I just have never been content with this is the way it is, and what can you do about it? You follow that kind of logic, nothing will get changed, and it hasn't always been that way. This is all new stuff. We go back as far as you want to before we even had modern civilizations. The VA happened, it's here, and it continues to evolve and grow, and we as veterans continue to evolve and grow. Before I get into that, I am going to go in depth into my military history. I'm going to skip over my school here because that's going to build up into what I view as a really atrocious epidemic that's happening to our veterans nowadays. Okay, so Korea, I think 2003-ish time frame, maybe 2004-ish. Korea, 2002, 2003. Right out of basic training in the imagery school. I had a really fun time out there. It was really rowdy. With a crew of about 20 of my cohorts, and I think 15 of us had pending Article 15. So, have mercy on our team leaders and then, sergeants that had to deal with us. But, it was Korea. Look up the stories, being a private early 20s in Korea. I wouldn't take it back. It made some really awesome friends out there. But while I was out there, I did OD on soju and almost died, the little white dot. And I was admitted. They gave me Haldol and Valium and stuff. I was shaking. I was trying to burn all the soju out. And that kind of fucked up my career a little bit in the beginning. The commander wasn't too happy about me almost dying, opened up a investigation on me. But I was kicking ass at my job, so they let me work. And then they shipped me off to the next unit for their problem. That unit was out in Germany. And it wasn't until Germany I found out that I couldn't do my job anymore. When I hit the ground in Germany, they sent me right out to Iraq 30 days in. That was about 2003. But kind of getting back to Korea a little bit, for medical stuff, almost died. The medics did a good job of trying to make sure I was dead by pumping me full of crap. And I saw the little white dot there, and I also fell off of a ladder and fucked up my foot. I've got documentation for that, and this kind of builds up into my VA case too. But it wasn't until my first deployment I figured out that I couldn't do my job. So I was just an extra dude in Iraq.
Last night, a square mile in central Baghdad seemed like hell on earth. To the heart of Baghdad's administrative district, this was about demolishing Saddam Hussein's symbols of power. They also hit at least one of his presidential palaces. More cruise missiles, 300 of these frightening weapons were aimed at Baghdad during the night. The last arrived here as an air raid siren was going off just before dawn.
And being an extra dude in Iraq is kind of interesting because, they just, okay, like, hang out at the CP, the command post, and whatever we need done, you're going to be the guy that does it. Fill sandbags over here, watch people fill sandbags over here, go down to the motor pool and PMCS this truck, lift crap over here, inventory this. Kind of like a CB, I guess, like a Navy CB, like an extra dude, but I didn't have any carpentry skills. I got a lot of respect for CBs. But I ended up getting to a point where, I would work out for 2 hours a day, eat food, and clean my weapon system. And then they'd send me out on convoys. Sometimes I'd leave the wire like 2 to 3 times a day. And this is in 03, 04. I'd say off of the heels of Fallujah, right when Armadi was kicking off. And we had about 33 explosions a day. And I got some images of me while I was out there. They were kind of impressed that I was still kind of being upbeat and positive about not being able to work my skill set job. And they assigned me the M249, so I cleaned that guy every single day. Loaded up on ammo. I had about 600 rounds with me. Each drum was like 10 pounds. The saw, I had the big one, not the parasaw. It was like 17.2 pounds. We didn't get body armor right away. We still had like the flak vests, but some of us were lucky. They were phasing in some of the woodland plates, like the stuff that actually stop 7.62 rounds, like from rifles. So that was the good stuff. And we're still kind of welding stuff onto our trucks. IEDs weren't really in full swing yet, but I remember I'd have to drive through choke points, and there was one where they blew it up so many times because we had to go through this one specific spot and do like a 180-degree turn, like a really pinched tight turn to hop up onto the highway. And they knew we had to go there, and they kept blowing that place up. And I tried to jump through that hole every time I went through there. I remember one time I made my first sergeant scream really loud, really high-pitched, because the first sergeant and the commander, they had their different flavors. The commander, he was a single dude. He didn't give a shit. Like, if he dies, he dies. We're out here in war. Do it up as hard as you can. But some people were kind of reserved. And I remember first sergeant, he's a great dude, a really good first sergeant. But he's like, I've got kids, while I'm gunning through these IED holes and stuff. I'm 23. It's like the Wild West. Whoever has the biggest guns makes the rules. And it was super intense. My best deployment. we lived like shit. We lived in a tent with like rats trying to eat our food. I remember there was a rat that would piss in my Kevlar all the time, and I just could not get the piss smell out of it. That was really an awesome deployment. One of the highlights was I got to drive point for the battalion all the way from Baghdad to Kuwait. And we did take some enemy fire on that trip. And yeah, I've got a route here showed up. I think it's like 580 kilometers. That was just one truck. You know, I went out to Camp Anaconda, did tons of runs out to Abu Ghraib. Thankfully, I couldn't do my job, so I just plug in my earbuds and listen to, I think Blur had a new album, Think Tank. It was kind of a good juxtaposedness from the war of some melancholy, emo-esque type music to listen to while things were blowing up out there. I think we had, on average, 33 explosions every day in the city of Baghdad when we were there. And just to give you an idea, you know, you can see here, like, that's just one day. So, and sometimes they were far away, sometimes they were close. We were taking a lot of indirect fire in the beginning of the war. IEDs were kind of coming to be like a new thing, but I just got to the point where, you know, like if I blow up, I'll die. You know, if I worry that I die, then I'm just gonna get fried out worrying, and I won't be as effective unless I just chill out and accept the fact that if one comes in this little temper tent, we're just gonna get blown up. And when I came into the unit, we had outstations out there. Some of our guys did get blown up and they died, you know, like guys that I went to the schoolhouse with. So the mortality factor was real. Like, you know, you can blow up. After we lost one of our soldiers, my battalion commander, he wigged out, and like after every little pop happened, he's screamed, "Get to the bunker!" And he would make his staff come with him and jump into the bunker. And sometimes the bunker would be full of water. You wouldn't believe it, but you think Iraq is just all desert and stuff. But this might be good timing. I think Burning Man, they had a big rain event. There's like mud all over their feet and stuff. And that kind of really silty sand, when it gets wet, it just sticks onto everything. It gets really cold in the wintertime. If you don't have cold weather gear, you're gonna freeze. You know, like puddles will actually get a layer of ice on the top of them in February. Yeah, and he yelled, "Oh, get to the bunker!" Bleesh, hear him there like that. I'm glad I was at the company level, and we closed the tent flap doors. Like, I could get blown up trying to run into the bunker. You know, we don't know where they're going to go to. But there was one time when I was down in the motor pool where where I was tasked out to PMCS up the first sergeant's truck. It was always busted, leaking transfer case oil. And there's this route, if you can see here on this map, and I'd have to walk from our living quarters all the way down to the motor pool. And the motor pool sergeants would love to turn off their radios. And then, you know, commander and first sergeant was like, all right, go walk down to the motor pool and tell the motor pool sergeant we need this. Like, I'd make that walk probably 3 or 4 times a day. But, yeah, and plus, they ran out of boots when we deployed, and they had to give us all a size smaller, and I had to pull the inserts out of my boots. That kind of really fried my feet out in the beginning. But yeah, I was down there in the motor pool, and I think they wanted me to bust one of the tires off of the rim, and they gave me a helper dude that we got these 3 awesome privates that came in. They're kind of really hardcore, you know, gunning for it, but really, really young, really green, like cherry, super cherry. I was up more in like specialist zone. I already did a tour in Korea. You know, had a little bit of working knowledge, but, you know, definitely not any like veteran status of being out there or sergeant power. You know, it's still a E nothing. And but maybe a little bit taller than these guys, and they looked up to me, you know, like, oh, here, you know, here's this guy, he's the machine gunner, he's the commander's driver. And they didn't give that position away. There's 2 other soldiers that were in line for it, and those 2 other soldiers ended up being Green Berets. I think our unit had 6 attempts at Special Forces school out of our company during those years, and we had 5 successes, and I think we're doing better than some of the infantry companies for soft selection. We're really PTing ourselves out there. We want to be as strong as we could. But back to the motor pool here. You know, we'd get them, and they'd hit and explode really close. Everybody look at their watch. Oh, that's EOD, you know, explosive ordnance, a controlled detonation. We tell ourselves that to like put it out of our minds and not worry about it. But we really didn't know if it was incoming, outgoing, controlled detonation. It's just another explosion. But these ones here, I had some close ones up in Camp Anaconda too while I was up there. Trying to smuggle our vehicles out through the Air Force, through customs, because it's easier that way, but the Air Force wasn't having it. They're like, yeah, you're going to have to go down to Kuwait with all your stuff, which is totally legit. But I got to go up there. But yeah, Anaconda was getting blown up all the time. But yeah, down here at the motor pool, you know, I felt one, boom, like, shook the heck out of my chest before I could even look at my buddy. One of these 3 guys that we got, I think we kind of locked eyes above the vehicle, and then the second one came, wham, and I heard a piece of metal like zip by my right ear, like zzz, like a fidget spinner or something. But like I could hear it really far away, and then it was really close to the point where you can't move out of the way. It's just there instantly. But time kind of slows down a little bit, and you're stuck in a spot. After I heard the shrapnel zip past us, and it actually like hit so hard, like it hit my chest, like my heart, and it hit my buddy's chest too. And we're still kind of like in this, oh shit, locked eyes moment. You know, he's on the passenger side, I'm on the driver's side. I hadn't gotten to the point where I'm busting any tires off. We kind of just nodded, and we knew we needed to get the fuck out of here immediately. And we both started to get into the vehicle. Then we heard a third one, tink. And I don't know if I've got the explosion places plotted out. It's more than 20 years ago, and the geography's changed, but I pulled some of the imagery from Google from that time frame. But I remember the motor pool being a 2nd-story building, and we looked up when we heard the tink, and it was right next to us, probably I'd say 200 feet away, maybe 250 feet. You know, just eyeballing it. And if that mortar had detonated and air bursted right above us, we would have been liquefied. And it tink, hit the wall, and then rolled down into one of the camo nets, and it was just swinging there. And we unasked the AO and got the hell out of there. But we didn't really think twice about it. But yeah, the enemy was notoriously blowing up the mortar pool, and they spotted us, and they were walking in mortars on top of us, and they were really effective, and they were really fast at doing it. If that third one had exploded, we'd be dead. And I think that's the second time I almost died in the Army. Okay, after that, we convoyed out, made it back to Germany. We just trained our ass off. I think we did 5 1-month-long field training exercising drills of like weapons qualifications, PT, FTX drills, like close and near ambush drills. And when I was down at the company on my first deployment, they had me doing S1, S3, and NBC. I actually signed for 3 hand receipts as a specialist out of 12 that the company had. And I remember there's like basic equipment, BII for the Humvees. I'm like, I'm not signing for this unless I can see all the stuff. I think my first sergeant was kind of impressed with that. Like, don't sign for anything unless you can see it. But I continued on with the training regime and, and PTing and PTing and PTing. But I do remember, like, closer to the end, I did have an incident where I flagged a convoy on accident. We were going up a really steep incline, and the T&E mechanism, when I was up on the gun truck, got stuck, and then the weapon system depressed down. I got in some trouble, got roasted by my sergeant major and hollered at, but... after that, I was like, okay, doing company stuff's great, but I want to get back to doing my job, and it was kind of bittersweet. I was really high op tempo working at the company. Got to send people to armor school, to all these training schools, and get their travel arrangements set up and coordinate that, do quarterly mandatory brief slides, help out the commander with that. I was learning a lot on how the ins and outs of the unit company level operates. Kind of felt like I was kind of giving up a little bit by going back into my mission, but I trained up for like a half a year to do this job, So it was bittersweet, and the op tempo wasn't as high, but hey, I'm here. Let's see what I can do. I'm gonna kick butt there. I'm gonna kick butt here too. And I fixed up my stuff that happened in Korea. They're like, all right, good bill of health. You can do all your stuff. Everything's good. And after the year, I really only spent like 6 months in Germany, in between the field training and the first deployment. And then, a year later, right back out to the same spot. But on one of those field training exercises, I did get to fire off 15,000 rounds through my saw. because we had a whole lot of extra ammo, and that was really fun. That's kind of where I really honed in my SAW skills. But on the second deployment, when I was doing my job, I never left the wire, so it was like I stayed inside the wire the whole time. But I got to remotely leave the wire while we're working on the drone operations, and I'll play a video kind of highlighting some of the things that I was contributing to. I remember our commander was saying, hey, we're getting, this is when IEDs really picked up, and we're getting hammered by these improvised explosive devices. And he's kind of challenging everybody, like, what's the solution to solve this puzzle? And for me, drones were just coming in to the military, It's kind of a novel thing, and we're kind of integrating that. And the idea of a drone pre-September 11th, it was geared more like a tank buster or Bradley buster or artillery piece, still kind of on the heels of the Cold War era type mindset. But the war that we're currently fighting wasn't a hot, a hot war where we're fighting against tanks and armored pieces. The Iraqi army capitulated, I think, within weeks or months after shock and awe came through. So it was an insurgency, and we had to adapt that. And I did help out a lot in integrating new technologies and advancing our systems. But the thing was, like, IEDs, how do we find them, And that's when I pitched the idea of persistent surveillance, and you can hear General O talk about that on 60 Minutes, but and I'll get in a little bit later to the enlisted versus officer politics, and how you have to kind of, like, you really got to have a lot of selfless service when you're coming from an enlisted standpoint. You have to think beyond yourself. You got to think, okay, I have this idea here, but if I want to see it actually come into fruition and be instantiated and produce something extraordinary that will ultimately save a tremendous amount of soldiers' life, I have to let it go and let these Schmiegely type individuals feel as if they had incepted the idea. But I did get some kudos back, and I remember we were embedded with the Australian army. They're kind of appalled. They're like, oh, they're not even going to tell them about that they're going to do this. I actually found out that it was being implemented later on in my career. And then I reached out with the Australian air wing commanders, and I was like, well, yeah, they did it. Here it is, after the fact. Because when you're working in that environment, you're moving, and then you go on to your next duty assignment, so.
With the help of the drones and their high-powered cameras, Army commanders were able to see or map the entire theater of operations and figure out the enemy's tactics and patterns with so-called persistent surveillance.
Yeah, that deployment, it was a lot of long 12-hour shifts, but it was very, very rewarding because, you're the eyes in the sky and racking and stacking missions from the air, assets to ground assets. And I can't talk about anything that's operational at all, but I will say this, and this will kind of play into some of the other slides that I have later. Like, I'd be on mission, something super intense, people getting shot at, like I can spot enemy people on the roof, shooting at our guys, and I get tapped on the shoulder. Hey, you need to go pick up cigarette butts outside because the sergeant major said so. It was a very, I don't really think there's kind of a lag phase there in the military on what we were actually doing and how we were perceived, So yeah, they're like, oh, these guys aren't doing shit, we'll task them out to go burn crap and pick up cigarette butts. So we did both. But yeah, I was like, really? Like right now? And then I grabbed my best soldier and I put them on that mission, and then we carried out. The sergeant major says, hey, go do this, you do it, But yeah, it was a very rewarding deployment. Got a lot done. It was also really boring too. But I put tons of my work into developing a standard operating procedure, which would later be the foundational SOP for Task Force Odin. Yeah, and if you can see here, I just have a time lapse of the base, like, here and there. And you can see, like, I think the imagery change is like a 6-month change. We stood up tons of stuff. The environment was totally different. The Wild West vibes were gone. And if you had to wear reflective belts on the base, it felt like Garrison a lot. But here's a little bit of a blurb on Task Force Odin. That's open source. But it wasn't all for naught, like I think somebody did notice what I was doing. They were paying attention. I worked on that SOP for like 6 months, writing code, and it was, I had to do something with my mind while I was there, and, worked with General Dynamics. We fielded it up. We got new equipment installed, and operationally ready as the applied version of drones, instead of just theory and construction, we were applying it to the war. And they said, we want you to go to Central Command, which was our major command in the area. And it was a joint command, and I needed a break. I was on my second deployment. The year in between really wasn't a break. We're hammering through field training exercises, and a stateside deployment was just what I needed. And I was really looking forward to Florida. And, when I got there, I got put into a very interesting unit, and I got to work with Air Force, Marines, Navy, reserves from all branches. We didn't have a Coast Guard guy that was there, and contractors. So we kind of made our own family unit because we're doing joint operations. Like, you have the branches of the military, but the major command is running the mission. And I've got a map here of the area of responsibility. And, there's a whole bunch of countries that are there, but our main two focus was the war areas, Iraq and Afghanistan, with a main focus on Iraq. And kind of Afghanistan, was doing their thing, and ancillary others, outside of that. But every day, like, Iraq was the hot spot. And up until this point, the Army really didn't have any means of precision guided anything. We had tanks, we had artillery, and a very powerful aviation. We got to watch them do their thing. They're very impressive. Close air support with Apaches and Blackhawks and Chinooks. But we didn't have any like long range GPS guided stuff until HIMARS rolled out, and that was coming out, and they were testing it out, and they were fielding it, I think around 2003 and 2004. And it's like, hey, the Army can do long range GPS guided stuff too, but they didn't have any experts to do that. So I was the first guinea pig that got trained up by the Air Force and the Navy. The Marines didn't have anybody. They used artillery with the Army in conjunction, so kind of like piggybacking with the Army. And the Air Force people and the Navy people, mainly the Air Force, are like, oh, this guy, he's pretty smart. Things stick with him. And what I was bringing to the table too, like everybody that was there, for the most part, and especially anybody that was doing any GPS stuff or precision coordinates, nobody had deployed. So they didn't have any first-hand knowledge of being down on the ground at where we were sending these grids out. So I was bringing drones and ground, like the sense of urgency, like these people are real. We're not playing video games, this is life and death stuff. I kept that sense of urgency alive out there. That was probably one of the main things that I brought with me. But yeah, an in-depth knowledge of drones and feeds, and that helped out a lot. And yeah, and they trained me up on how to target up my own grids, and then I got certified through NGA, and I was the only person in the whole Army that could produce grid coordinates. And this is in my unclass evaluations, which I'll show, and my unclass certificates for weapon systems, So, here I am with all these people, and I'm the first one that's been deployed, that worked drone operations, that's mensurating his own grids. So, yeah, a lot of people look for my advice on stuff, and plus I was an imagery person. I was doing satellite imagery out in Korea. I was bringing that to the table too. I had a lot of hats that I was wearing. I was coming there. I could learn a lot rapidly and fast. So they trained me up on grids, and they also trained me up on collateral damage assessments. So it's more like counting bodies. Usually that's either one role or another role. But I had both of those roles that I was trained up on. I was a sponge for information. I just couldn't learn enough, and I learned a lot, and I retained a lot. So they sent me out to tons and tons of schools. Went to all the schools that I could get my hands on. I was just learning continuously. Then I learned all the Navy stuff, their cruise missiles. I learned the Air Force, their bombs and their bunker busters and stuff, and how that translates over to the Air Force and their delivery system, or in the Navy too, the Navy bombers. And it was really, really intense though. The stakes couldn't be any higher. These requests, they come in from Iraq and Afghanistan, usually from forward observers, JTACs, TACPs, special ops, or from conventional forces, and that would go through the battle sector commanders, and then it would hit my desk, and the suspense times were like, bam, now, how long do you have to reload that magazine? They say the rest of your life, when you're in war. How long do you have to get those grids back out and those solutions back out? And I'm providing a good food chain chart of how this worked, and what the approval ratings were for that food chain. And I worked very closely with some very high up individuals that had to make some really high up decisions. But also kind of like the filtering mechanism, like I know we'd get a new brigade or battle sector commander, so take Iraq and chunk it up into pieces, say 5 major sectors or 4 major sectors. One's covered down by a Marine brigade, and then we have 4 other Army brigades, and sometimes you get new ones in. If you ever watched or know about some of the behavioral experiments, with like the heart zapper experiment, how many people, this guy has a heart condition. If you push this button, it's a huge zap. If you push this button, it's a little zap. How many people push the big zap just because some morbid curiosity factor, having this huge well of power, you now have the ability to take life, and some people just want to exercise that. So, but for me, my main mission was, I've been working my ass off for years and years and years now. War is hell, and I want this shit to be over with and done. I want to win the war, finish it, and get out. And I want to ensure that my cohorts in arms make it home safely. That's paramount. And thinking beyond that, if we just arbitrarily waste people, or don't delineate targets well, we're going to be pissing off the Iraqis. And that's going to help out the insurgents in their recruitment strategies. And that's going to get more of my guys wasted. But if we can effectively and precisely target those that are engaging us and building up these bombs, then we can repel the forces that are causing harm to us, and we can get the hell out of there. I desperately wanted the war to end. And when you're in war, it is automatic. You like to think that you have a lot of leisure and latitudes on, oh no, I won't do this or won't do that. But no, if people are trying to kill you, you're going to want to kill them back. And we fought really hard. My generation, we kicked ass. We were Army strong. We worked out forever, and we wanted to be the most badass motherfuckers we could possibly be. And even General O said it, I think in 2010, just before sequestration, he's today we have the most powerful military in the world. 10 years from now, I don't know if we can say that. And I am kind of proud that we did bring the most powerful military in the world at the time into existence, and we were part of it. We did fight hard. September 11th happened. We were in our 20s. The Pentagon blew up. The Twin Towers went down, and that made sense to me then. We're under attack. But you get into this food chain here. There's a lot of other brainstorming that I would do when I was just bullshitting around. I didn't think that, or didn't know if people were listening or paying attention to me. But I remember saying why don't we have a space force? And that was right after watching Avatar and seeing the creature that flies higher has supremacy. Where's it? I want to go to outer space. I want to be in a little space pod looking at the ground in real time. And I knew that we had a lot of issues with drone and our coding abilities, and there's a gap there. And I diverted a lot of my spare time in learning how to code on my own to kind of cover in wherever I could on that. But I really didn't jump full forward into coding until my last deployment. While I was there, I supremely got burned out. The burnout rate was incredible, but I'd see people, they'd only last 3 months in that shop, and then they'd leave. Typically like 2 years. I made it for 4 years doing that job. Sometimes you'd be stacked like a short order cook with orders lined up, like doing triage on everything, trying to get firepower out to where troops and soldiers needed it. I think the SecDef at the time, Leo P., I think he got wind of what I was doing. Some people saw some of my awards and evaluations, mostly my evaluations. After my buddy died on the first deployment that got blown up, I think he got a Bronze Star. On the second deployment, I saw a lot of O's just handing out Bronze Stars, and it kind of put a bad taste for awards in my mouth, and I really didn't pursue that much. I really didn't want one. Like, I didn't die. I don't deserve this level of recognition. But Leo Panetta, he tried to make the Distinguished Warfare Medal, but it really wasn't taken well from the community. They're like, oh, some dude sitting in a chair far away, we'll call it the Nintendo medal. But like, for real, I would smoke 1 million cigarettes, come back in, drink a gazillion cups of coffee, smoke more cigarettes. We're kind of like a bag of nerves in there, like, all the time. And I remember one time I actually literally thought my heart exploded in my chest and I was dead. And I put my next soldier in command, or squid at the time, in command, and I checked myself into the TMC to have my heart checked. And then later on, they put these little AED devices in the hallways, because I just walk around like it was more stress than most humans should ever have to go through in their life. If you fat finger one grid, you get one thing wrong, then those bombs, rockets, or cruise missiles, they'll go in the wrong spot. They could kill your guys or not kill the enemy that's trying to kill your guys. Everything had to be absolutely perfect, and every second mattered and every second counted. I thought I was going on vacation to go back to stateside out of a war op tempo, but the tempo was even more intense. The stakes were even higher. While I was there, I did do a smaller deployment out to the Middle East. I just like, we have to figure out a way, like, going all the way up here to the major command. For troops in contact situation, we need more rapid response, and I coordinated with the National Geospatial Agency and was the senior instructor for a program called Precision Strike Suite Special Operation Forces, and would go out on little trips to train up soft people, and then I'd go out on trips to train up the Marine Corps on kind of a field-ready, expedient version of a targeting system that wasn't nearly as advanced as our mensuration capabilities were, but it's something that they could do where they could get really good grid coordinates out in the field.
1, 2, still taking fire.
30 seconds.
Roger, 30 seconds to impact, and we're still taking fire. Negative, not this time. About 15 seconds to impact.
Oh shit. The rounds are hitting right in front of us. bomb. Yeah.
And then they could service their own targets. Some people, when they get into a power situation, they want to absorb power and hold on to that power. No, everything has to come to me. I was the opposite. I was like, man, I am burning alive in this stovepipe, and I'm going to do everything that I can to optimize this and make it function better. And I see this, team unit opportunity here. I'm going to train these individuals up. And then made a program of instruction. I trained up other instructors that could stay out into the field, and then I serviced them. And then made a full-blown targeting organic self for Afghanistan after Iraq was kind of cooling off when Obama took office. But yeah, I guided bombs for Bush and Obama, and they never once challenged any of my recommendations, either one of them, which I was kind of hoping to have them at least challenge one of them. But growing up and getting older, things change. But I want to let you know, talk is cheap. Here's no shits my certificates of this rare training that I went through. I actually went to a lot of staff courses too, where I was trained up by Top Gun people in Damnick, Virginia, on how to do our wargaming strategies for mass air attack plans. And every country does that stuff. But that kind of touches base a little bit on Mar-a-Lago for me. Was I compromised over there? And that's another story about how things started to get kind of weird on my journey, and maybe I'll get into that a little bit more. But let's stay on track, and let's talk about some of the hard ones here a little bit. The hardest one was when our guys were getting overrun in Afghanistan by this huge Taliban force, and that comes and lands on my desk. And if I can't see where the enemy is, I can't do shit. And sometimes weather just doesn't cooperate, and sometimes the machine doesn't work properly. And I'm not going to get into details on this one, but this did happen on my watch, and it's something that I think about a lot, and it's something that I talk to the VA about quite a bit, and it's something that I did. All this stuff I've told my PTSD evaluators, because we are going to get into the VA portion later on this. But yeah, I could not get firepower to these guys, and thankfully close air support. I'm not sure if they had A-10 Warthogs or Apache helicopters come in. They were able to get in there through the weather. But I couldn't get eyes on, and the risk is if it's a danger close, and they're within 650 meters, in this canyon valley setup, then okay, they're in the basin of a canyon, which is an awful spot to be, or of a valley, these two big mountains, and even if I do fire into this area, there's a good chance that frag's going to blow into their area. And what if they move sight and they're on an offensive, or I recommended that they get the fuck out of there, get the fuck out, like in Aliens, Ripley's pull your fucking dudes out, get them the fuck out of there. They're going to get overrun. and then I'll blow up the fucking base because I know where that is. Well, that fucking took like 12 to 16 hours. After about 16 hours, I was burnt out and fried. They didn't leave fast enough. And it was a good plan that they left really fast so they could get the fuck out. And then the enemy would overtake the base, and then while they're in the base, we blow it up. Like they could have been out of there in like fucking 30 minutes, 45 minutes. Get your shit, get sensitive vitamins, get the fuck out. Relay communications shit, 16 hours later, they finally blow up the base, which was pointless at that time after close air support wiped them out. But I was really pissed at the Air Force there, but I'm not blaming the whole Air Force. I love a lot of the Air Force. It's just some old thinking methodology, like, equipment's worth more than people out there. Some 80s Cold War vibe shit, but this is like the most intense firefight of Afghanistan during the whole time. Like, sometimes you gotta like play it all out there and put your cards on the table and take a chance and just go. They needed to do that, and I was pushing for that, and they didn't. And our dudes died. Those were the consequences. And like when I say like no shits, like I'd have moments where I thought my heart exploded. It is for real. Like, and I think that kind of muddled the waters for my VA trip later, because I actually told them that this was the most intense time that I had in the military was when I wasn't even in war, and they were having a hard time wrapping their heads around that. And so they documented that, and they tried to shift everything as a remote warfare person, which is not the case. I actually did both. I was a machine gunner in 2003, driving all over the place while stuff was blowing up. But I do want to add in here, like, talk is cheap. Here's my unclass evaluations. There's no names that are on there, but you can see and look. I'll give you a little bit of time, like, how many bombs I had to drop. This is just 2 out of the 4 years while I was back there, and like the programs of instruction. It's all in my records. It's all accessible to the VA too, for the VA evaluations processes. Yeah, man, ooh-wee. Like, I did a short deployment in there, setting up an organic targeting cell, a lot of equipment, a lot of gear, logistics, and then doing iterative, like, hop around all over the country. But going on a deployment solo was kind of my thing. I really enjoyed the freedom of that, where I could like hitchhike around in Afghanistan and Iraq too. Make little hops inside there. But while I was talking to them about, hey, we need a cyber command, we need Space Force, we need, these other capabilities, I was really kind of, I was smart. I knew, like, selfless service, give it up. They're gonna put it on their stuff. It was about 50-50 with every lieutenant colonel that I worked with. Half of them were super awesome and super supportive, and the other half were like these schmeagly, like, give me the ideas and you're getting nothing, like. And I kind of felt like I was limited, because I did try to go to college when I was 20, and I was working full time, going to school full time, and I was paying for my own school, and shacking up with my dad. My parents split up, and my car broke down. I was like, hey, Dad, help me out, you know. I'm going to work full-time and I'm going to school full-time. I'm paying for all my school. My car's broke. Help me, you know. And he's like, well, you got to figure it out and be a man, you know. I was like, shit, like... Yeah, kind of a strange dad a little bit, and stepmom issues. Like, I didn't get along with my stepmom that much. I was trying to reconnect with my father, and he's kind of taking the lead on my stepmom stuff. And you know, I was like, well, I guess in 2000, join the army. You know, get money for school. I joined in April of 2001. We all know what happened in September, and that happened when I was in basic training. Basic training when September 11th happened was super intense. My drill sergeants, they wigged out, but that's a whole other story. But I'm not going to leave this out. I think we had like a 270 average PT score, even factoring all the zeros for the entire company while we got there. PT'd the crap out of us. And we had an old Vietnam sergeant major that was like just like the last high five with the Vietnam people, and he was a badass dude. But anyways, yeah, so 50-50 on the Schmiegely lieutenant colonels, because to become a flag officer is pretty tough, and that's from colonel on up, and you got to do something really extraordinary. So they're kind of fishing for ideas, you know, from the creative pot. And almost every lieutenant colonel that I worked with got promoted to colonel, and one of them went on to become a 3-star general. But yeah, a little bit of the platoon reference there. And I know, like, the Vietnam, they're like, it's split. There's a lot of them like, platoon was crap. It's crazy. But it did capture some moments with the enlisted and officer dichotomy here. And I also bring in the caste system over in India. You know, some people don't think that aren't aware of it, but yeah, they live by a caste system over there. If you're born into the Dilata, I think that's how you say it, then you're basically locked into being poor for your whole life, no matter what. And if you're a Brahmin, you know, you're going to be a lord no matter what. And I think the next tier down is for military and policing, and then they have a couple of middle tiers that are in there. But the military does the same thing too. And I kind of wanted to do away with it. It's only a dual caste system, but it's still a caste system, to where if you weren't fortunate enough to complete a degree, you're really not eligible for officer ranks. They do have a very small, teeny green to gold program where I think they accept like maybe 100 people a year. It's really, it's highly, highly, highly selective. Might be easier for you to get selected for Delta Force than to get selected for green to gold. And you have to have the credits accumulated later on anyways. I think at least up to 90 credits before they'll even consider you going over to this area. But if you do have and this perspective too is more from the 90s, you know, for me, like the later 90s. Not everybody had a degree, and you know, I tried my best to get a degree, and I knew I had the aptitudes for it. And I was kind of burnt that I had to work through this pipe of aptitudes to get things instantiated into reality. But you know, it is what it is, and I did get to serve up some really awesome stuff. But I also pitched the idea like, hey, you know, people with aptitudes, you know, maybe we should have more of a linear track here, you know. And I was thinking more back into the colonial time frame, you know, like officers used to be career, And enlisted used to be, your average everyday Joe Schmo. Like, we have a conflict, I'm going to enlist for this conflict, and then I'm going to leave after the conflict. They weren't really considered careerists. The officers were considered careerists, and often, like the French, they would, if you're an officer in the French army, you could go over to the colonial army and train up them. They kind of interchanged and rotated out as kind of like the first defense contractors back in the day, as like professional military. But later on, that kind of morphed and changed into, career enlisted and career officer. And then we get our own contractors after that. It's kind of like the mercenaries. But I was thinking, like, private all the way up to 4-star general, a linear track. If you have the aptitudes and the grit, why not start from the bottom and make it all the way up to the top? I was trying to pitch an in-house organic school for my skill set, on top of the imagery training that I got after basic training, to help strengthen the Army. I wanted to take this knowledge and give it to the Army. And that was one of my main, we can be so much stronger if we make a school of thought for these people. And when I was on BNOC, I thought that'd be a great opportunity to pitch that to the Commandant. And I was kind of really disappointed because, I kind of figured out where the limitations of the enlisted were. A lot of people don't know this, but the command sergeant major of the Army that's been in for 30 years will be outranked by a second lieutenant that's been in for 1 day, and it's nonsensical. There's a lot of ways people kind of handle that in their mind. Well, yeah, but the sergeant major probably knows some captains and they'll probably that. But the brass tacks, no squirming around it. That is the way that it is. And I didn't think that was right. And I kind of pissed off a few senior enlisted people while I was doing that. But and they kind of drummed up some people later on in my last deployment. After the fact, they kind of felt threatened by that a little bit. And I wasn't saying do away with the senior enlisted, have multiple tracks. Say somebody comes in with a college degree, maybe you want to keep those butter bars for them before they ease into captain. Maybe somebody doesn't have the type of mindset to want to evolve and develop outside of the conventional ways of doing things, and they want to stay on the enlisted track, But opening that pathway was the primary objective, and I think that was taken different ways. As my career kind of blew up, people would take a little thing and then they'd zing it all the way one way, or they'd zing it all the way another way. And that was later on in my career. But the kind of the feeling within the Army, kind of getting back to that time where I was thepped on the shoulder at the hey, go pick up cigarette butts outside while I'm watching people getting blown up they're shot up in Solder City. People throwing grenades at each other and stuff. It was an intense mission to watch. Seriously, I got to do extra duty right now in the middle of this. I kind of felt the dude in Departed here, Leo, nobody knows what the fuck I'm doing. Really, they don't have an archetype inside their mind. People think oh, you're a Green Beret, or which have tons of respect for operators. They were in emergency mode continuously, and I think their mortality rate was 30% for all their deployments. Just insane. And this Doogie Howser from, and I know that's not the guy's name, but from Starship Troopers, I'm making decisions up where I was at CENTCOM where I'm deciding a lot of life and death shit continuously, wearing both of those hats at the same time. But while I was there, I I was hitting a wall. I'd say in 2009-ish, 2010-ish. That I think 4 recruiters in Texas, they all committed suicide at the same time. We were just burnt down to the bones, and I was contemplating shooting myself, and that's kind of when my first suicidal ideation started to come along. I was just tapped and drained to the bone, but I felt guilty that it was a stateside assignment. I was only doing small deployments. I wanted to get another deployment in, take this information and give this vital information back to the Army, but I really needed my buddies to kind of lean on to help carry me a little bit. And that's when I got sent along to, I volunteered for the assignment for Task Force Odin. As it grew up into its own full-blown balloon unit, I want to go back and check in on that. And it was another opportunity for me to deploy, and it was a chance for me to get in on manned missions. I wanted to get into the aircrafts and do like real-time scanning while I was up there, so I could check off all the boxes. I can do this, and do that. I didn't end up actually going in the aircraft. I was doing more administrative, like rack and stacking. And I had a team of about 20 analysts-ish, soldiers, that doing quality control on all their stuff, watching all their feeds for the entire area for Afghanistan. So kind of, Iraq was folding down. Obama didn't want that to happen. And there was I did have a lot of appreciation for Obama's strategy. He wanted to be more surgical about things, and he wanted to use drone strikes, versus we're going to send in this huge wave of occupying forces. I kind of felt conflicted, but I'm not the decision maker on this. Get your orders, move out, and do this. But I can definitely say, I admire this, or I don't agree with that. On some of our leaderships, I think General Shinseki during the initial invasion said, I'm going to need 36,000 troops if we're going to do this, and we're going to have to think about martial law if we're going to occupy and keep Iraq. And he got canned out when Rumsfeld was in during 2003, but that's kind of going back. Like he said the accurate thing. They asked for a troop surge later, but he got fired for asking what he knew that they were going to need. But they wanted to get their foot in the door into the war, and asking for this absurd number of soldiers would have been like a no. So yeah, Rumsfeld, he did Vietnam too. I really didn't like Rumsfeld that much. I did like Yates a little bit, and I did like Leo too while he was in for Secretaries of Defense. But moving on forward to my final deployment, so I was already burned out from my first 2 deployments and the field training exercise, but then like the typical 2-year burnout, 2 times on top of that, 4 years of guiding bombs. I was completely done, and then doing about a 9-month train up with my new squad. By this time, I'm a staff sergeant. I've got my own squad of soldiers, and I'm PTing the fuck out of them. They're like, we don't want to run up this hill. It's too hot. But I'm like, I'm kind of in 2003 war mode, we got to wear body armor. You might have a machine gun. We might be doing convoys. Like, I want to know who's going to croak or shit the bed out here first before we get into war. So, yeah, like high noon in Texas, compared to Iraq or Afghanistan, I remember in Kuwait, we threw a thermometer in the sand, and I think it maxed out at 132 degrees, and it just aired out like boiling, baking hot. So yeah, like Texas heat, and high noon, made sure everybody had plenty of water to drink. and I made them carry sunblock too, some of them. So we had sunblock on hand, and run up Turkey Hill Lane Road, run up the ammo roads, run, and we would do a good PT regimen, and that helped keep their minds focused. And I didn't want them to slip into the mindset that they're just playing video games, you know, that this is real. You must have a sense of urgency, and fostering that into that mindset. And deployed out there with that unit. Sequestration 2020 or 2010, and John Bonner, Speaker of the House, had to get a ripping point into Obama. Now I want to speak on that a little bit. Like, some people in the military lost their minds when Obama, a black man, got in office, and they just didn't want to work. Definitely not the bulk of people that I seen, but enough to cause some kind of turbulence on how the machine was operating. And maybe that's kind of my own Barnes moment there. And I do remember at CENTCOM, growing up as a Republican, kind of rallying the people behind this idea that, like, you know, maybe we need a strong businessman, you know, later, and that'll be, you know, President Trump. Yeah. And I never thought that would happen. And there's definitely links with Flynn and Sarasota. The Washington Post did a thing on their little hideout, super conservative area. After going to school, I learned a lot more stuff. You know, before this, I really didn't have much formal education. But let me continue on with my last deployment. So my last deployment, eager to do this, but we're under this downsizing environment. But I'm still excited. I'm getting back to the drone operation. I want to see how this evolved, and kind of shocked after years, like some of the issues that I was really harping on, like that we need to fix and resolve, still hadn't been resolved. Like, you know, like years and years later, like 5 years later, you know, and actually later, like 7 years later, like, you know, 5 to 6 years later, like, man, we absolutely need to have this. And, you know, it's like, okay, you know, work with what you got, what you can do. I learned how to database on my own. I got into SQL, and really did a lot of extraordinary things with Access. Actually, Microsoft Access was kind of my foot door into getting into databasing in SQL. But the downsizing environment, the older generation, you know, the senior generation, they really, Task Force Odin became a new thing. So it's kind of like the newest, greatest developing ledge kind of becomes the first thing that gets broken off when it's when you're in a sequestration type environment. And the big military looked at it as a container to throw everybody into this big pot. You know, we have a requirement for X amount of bodies. That's not a traditional unit. We'll throw them all in there. And it was kind of like, you know, in Batman and the Joker, you know, when Heath Ledger busts the pull stick on his knee. He's like, hey, we're having tryouts. And they were doing this kind of behavior to the sergeants. We're only going to have one that's in charge, and we've got, you know, like 5 or 6 of you stacked up for this one job position that's there. And they made it really super competitive, and they really turned it into this dog-eat-dog environment. And there was a clear distinction between like who was looking out for their career and who was, but we still had a war that was going on. And for me, nothing could take my eyes off of the war. So like everybody that had their faces pointing forward into the mission, we kind of had our backs exposed. And it was really brutally heartbreaking. The end of my career, it happened to a lot of us, and I hope we kind of gather and we can congeal 1/3 of the base of Fort Hood, which was the largest base in the Army at the time. This is over 10 years ago. I don't know how it is now. But yeah, 1/3 of the largest base of the Army was separating out of the military after that deployment. And but the Army was kind of being wise about it too. So they were grabbing the people that had multiple deployments, and they were throwing them into this pot, the potential burnouts. And then they were throwing the people that had stayed in the military for a long time and had 0 deployments. Somehow they were evading the system, chumming up with their branch managers, getting out of every deployment. And we even had a sergeant major that was in the military for almost 30 years, and he had never deployed. While we're at a state of war for 10 years solid. That's kind of unheard of. And to make things even more complicated, now if we were in a positive growth environment, it would have been super awesome. But in a negative growth environment, we're embedded with all the aviation people that skirted out of deployments. Somehow they scooped them up. All these deployment dodgers, they dumped them into our unit, and we had to kind of like divvy out all the leadership positions, and we're kind of interleaved together. Now, one of my major goals was to bridge the intelligence and the operations together into a more cohesive, singular functioning unit. And this was a dream for me here, because I wanted to work with aviation. I saw what they're doing with their close air support, and I had tons of respect, still do. These deployment dodger people, they don't speak for. We lost so many helicopters. They were giving up their lives. They were out there dying too. And they were servicing a lot of targets. They were rapid response, and they were doing the medevacs, and they're getting supplies. They're moving troops out. Our helicopter people were phenomenal, and a lot of my buddies swapped over from the schoolhouse. They were offering incentives to become a helicopter pilot, and that was something that I was actually pursuing before I went into the targeting room. Like, I was studying up for the AFAS. I was doing my flight physicals, and I was planning on going onto that route, but targeting school just took precedence, and I was the only one in the Army that could do it at the time. It's like the needs of the Army. I had to stay where I was at and work the problem where I was at to get the most growth. Actually, when I was on my smaller deployment in Afghanistan, the Rangers were like, "Come with us, go through selection school," and they're even saying like, "We'll be easy on it." I didn't. Like fuck that. Be hard on me. Like, if I'm gonna make it, I'm gonna earn this shit. But I told him, like, I can't leave where I'm at. I have to stay with the problem. But anyways, the last deployment. So I'm working with some really cherry leadership. Somehow I got stuck with him, and I'm the guy that's been sponging up all this stuff. They're kind of really like squinching me out, like, "Oh, we don't have a weapons expert here. You're not doing that anymore. We're doing it this way, and we want you to function in this one role and do this one thing." I'm like, "Okay, all right, roger that. I can do that too all day long. Tell me what you need." And I think my leaders were feeling very insecure with the relationship I was developing with the soldiers. They came to me because I knew how to get the feeds going. I knew how to make things work. I knew how to run the missions. I knew how the information flew, and they kind of picked up on it a little bit. And then they sent me out to like their furthest outstation after that. And they sent me into an outstation out in Kandahar. I'm like, all right, send me to where I'm needed. You know, I'll do that. But I was stripped from my squad that I was training up, and I did have a hard time with that. But we were stacked for staff sergeants. Like they had them like miles deep, and I had my second staff sergeant that was right next to me, right under me. He was trained up with me. He trained with me the whole time, and I knew that he'd be there with the guys that are there. I really didn't want to leave my guys, but anyways, one of the outstations, they're like, hey, we need you out here. They need personnel out there. We need you to go. I'm like, roger that. So I go out to Kandahar. Kandahar was notoriously getting blown up in southern Afghanistan. Rocket attacks daily, and I was like, all right, yeah, send me in there, and then I get there, and I was not received well at all in Kandahar. I was immediately counseled by my first line supervisor, like, every single time you make one error, you will be written up for that. I'm like, whoa, like nobody's absolutely perfect, and I'm not guiding bombs here, but I get it, I'll be as proficient as possible, but you're telling me to be absolutely perfect. And we're still producing, like hundreds of thousands of products, there could be a double space of white line here, now and then. And later on, I found out that the person that I was replacing was taken away from the unit because he had a IG complaint, and there was an investigation for sexual harassment charges on one of the soldiers in the unit. And the senior leadership that was there, they felt that it was like overboard, unjust. I didn't know anything, but I was coming in. I had my major command combat patches with me, and I think they thought I was a criminal investigation plant, and they were hell bent on making my life hell. And one of them came up to me and is like, hey, have you seen the third nipple on so-and-so? Like, no shits. And I'm like, huh? Like, trying to see if I'd get in on this whatever talk. I really didn't give a shit. I didn't know what the fuck's going on, but I knew that if I didn't laugh at his joke at that minute, he'd have a flag in his mind. Okay, this guy's out to get me. Like, in that instant, and I knew the next 9 months of my life would be hell. But I'm not going to throw this female soldier under the bus. Like, for me, I'm like, there's got to be something up here. Like, and one of the other sergeants was making really awful comments about one of the other female soldiers that were there. And yeah, it's like, I don't have time for this shit, but I'm going to do what's right, and I'm going to stick up for whoever's getting bagged on here, And then so all of a sudden I get, I'm also thinking, how can I incorporate this huge trove of information that I've learned into this unit? And Afghanistan was slow as fuck. And about early on in this point, we bagged bin Laden. Bin Laden was gone. Like, And it kind of felt like, what the fuck are we doing out here? And it had nowhere near the intensity of Iraq. But still, like, if you're on mission, you're on mission. You pour your focus into it because anything can happen while you're on mission. And that's almost painful in its own way. Like, stare at a long dirt road for 16 hours and then wake up and do it again. Stare at another long, doing ID reconnaissance scans of the most boringest shit in the world. It'll burn your brain out doing that. I think we're cranking 80 hours a week out there too. But the perpetual beratement and after what I just got off of the heels doing and what I so desperately needed from the military, it felt really bad, but I could take it. Like, I was like, you know what? I'm still plugging through, still marching on. You know, this will pass too, you know. I'll keep my eyes focused on the mission. And I didn't let any of my soldiers talk shit about my leadership. I still maintain the discipline of command. They couldn't stand the fuck out of them. They want to talk shit about them. That's not how you do them like that. They're the leaders right now. It's their time. You know, they're in charge. So it begins. The VA battle and the journey. I'm skipping past some significant time after my life, but after being proposed with, you know, stay without honor or leave with honor, I left with honor. And I was really excited about building a new chapter in my life. Like, nothing could get me down. Like, okay, this is life's next obstacle. I'm going to take it on. And going through school, you know, I didn't just run to the VA immediately. I held out for several years until I felt the point, like, you know, hey, I'm going to need some assistance here. Like, I wasn't the type of soldier that would go to the TMC or the medical area for any small sniffle or scrape. I'd pretty much have to be near, you know, next to my deathbed to go there. So I was kind of like, I don't really want to go to the VA. It's a real big pride thing for me. But, you know, I was like, hey, they're here to help me out. And I've heard stories about other vets getting help from the VA. And, you know, I might need this resource that's out here for me. And I really had the idea that the VA was set up to help us out. And I didn't think that I needed any, like, prepping or coaching or, you know, I'll just go in there, you know, naked, open arms, here I am, assess me, and here's my situation. And I went in for my initial assessment phase in about 2016. And, you know, took everything that they said at their word, and I was like, okay, you know, I don't have PTSD. But I was eligible for some rating, I think around 30 to 60%. And that made me eligible for vocational rehab and VA medical. And I desperately needed some medical assistance because it was years and years since I've seen a doctor while I was doing my undergrad work. And I did get diagnosed with PTSD, but it was not service connected, and that was kind of boggling for me. Like, how could I have PTSD, you know, after just a few years of getting out, and it's not, you know, war related or military related at all. And I did kind of feel a little bit slighted about that. And, you know, I talked to other veterans, and they'd ask me, like, hey, did you get rated for PTSD? And I was like, no. And they kind of look at me like I wasn't part of the group. I couldn't access the therapy or the treatments. And 2020 was a really hard, trying time for everybody. And I decided to go back, and I'm like, I've got this stressor-related rating, which is not part of PTSD, and I wanted to get that rectified so I could be eligible for the PTSD group therapy treatments and talk to my fellow cohorts after the military. So then I resubmitted my claim process again, and I talked to the claims doctor, but this time it was with a private outfit. It wasn't the in-house compensation and pension individuals. And when I was with the in-house compensation and pension individuals, they were kind of like, so you haven't talked to the VFW, you haven't talked to, DAV or any of these veteran groups. I'm like, no, should I? I think I have these issues and problems, and I came here for you guys to check me out and see what it is. And I think the comp and pen guy is like, man, I wish more men could be like you. But I didn't really think that my PTSD was that big of an issue when I first got out, but I did notice that I was really snappy around any noise or pop or bang that a cup would fall. And I would kind of lash out at people. And I would be at barbecues. I couldn't handle being talked down to by anyone. And really kind of laying into some of these other people for, not respecting the situation that I was coming from, and a sense of hypervigilance. When I was in class, I'd sit at the appropriate way in the doorway, and I'd have thoughts what if somebody busts in the door with AK-47s? How am I going to react to that situation? Am I sleeping on the wheel a little bit? Am I still keeping my level of vigilance in a civilian setting? Just really kind of high strung, letting the smoke roll off of my shoulders. I did graduate magna cum laude in microbiology, and I felt like I was running at about 50% speed while I was doing that. And make no mistake, the books and the pencil work was hard, and I was accustomed to 80-hour weeks, so I just studied. But that kind of pain made sense. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but yeah, it's something that I thought I could accomplish. It was an attainable goal, and if I marched through these steps, I'd get there. And I did that. But yeah, and so in 2021, post-COVID, a whole lot more stress piled on. I really hadn't had an opportunity to talk to any mental health professionals about anything about the war. Anytime I talk to a therapist or a counselor at the VA, they're like, we're not ready to talk about the war. We can't talk about the war. And, I do this comp and pension appointment, and this is my really only time frame to talk about the war with a licensed mental health professional. So I really wanted to paint the picture of, this is all of the things that happened to me. And kind of going back to the in-house comp and pen in 2016, they wanted me to boil down all this stuff to the singular, most intense moment of my career and focus on that. And it's kind of really hard to do. Like I almost got blown up. You know, I had mortars walked in on me. I was a machine gunner. We drove through IED pits and had people try to drop bombs on top of us from roadways. I had little kids try to stab me with knives, and we had to play chicken with semis on the road and run vehicles off of the road and maintain dominance in this Wild West environment. And then rolling into the drone operations, watching people throw hand grenades at each other and trying to report this very sensitive information as rapidly as I can on life and death stakes continuously, and then leading up to guiding bombs and missiles for our major command in absolute life and death stakes for 4 years, and going in and out of all these deployments. How do I whittle this down to just one thing? And you know, well, what's the most intense thing? And I told him, like, guiding bombs was the most intense thing, and they it did not compute to them that being in a non-direct boots on ground war environment could be the most intense thing. And they kind of rolled that up into I was just this remote warfare individual that never really saw any combat. And that's how I was cased out for my PTSD. Oh, you can't have PTSD. Your most intense thing was guiding bombs. But I think they only had a placeholder in their mind for like a drone guide. I don't think they understood that I was at a major command unloading B-1 Lancer bombers with like 6 packs of 2,000-pound bombs. And if I fucked up one grid coordinate, you know, my ass would be handed to a 4-star general's desk, and I wouldn't be doing that job anymore. I guess like in Top Gun, you know, you'd be flying oil tankers over whatever, you know, barge. If you buzz the tower again, like, you make one error, you're out. Like, you have to be absolutely perfect, and it has to be rapid and right now. And in 2001, I really was like, all right, this is my shot. I got to really tell this guy. And I spent a long time working up a very heartfelt lay statement to go along with it. And I knew that this evaluator had access to all of my military records, all of my evaluations. And I thought they would actually go through that information in their determination process for evaluating me for PTSD. And, you know, at the time, going through severe isolation, more suicidal ideation was coming along. Not being able to make social friendships due to my inability to mingle with each, you know, people within my environment. And you know, I'm telling him about all this intense stuff, and I've only got like 15 or 20 minutes to really tell him, like, hey, this is serious here. And the doctor, and I think he was prior service, officer class, mental health, but part of that Cold War era generation. I don't think he had any deployments under his belt, but he served his time and he's getting his pension. And I think he lost an eye, and I assumed that was from war, but I later found out that wasn't from war. It may have been a disgruntled veteran after he denied one of their claims. But it's kind of tricky that the Army and the VA was planting this kind of person in here to make you think, oh man, I didn't lose an eyeball, you know, what can I say to this guy? But yeah, he looked at me without nuance and said, I'm sorry, sir, you just don't have PTSD. And it's like, next, you know, and I took it to heart again. You know, I was used and accustomed to following orders. and giving a lot of credit from the orders from my superiors. And I was like, I'm isolated from this group again, the therapy for PTSD. I'm not part of the PTSD group at the VA. And it was very, very painful. Getting that kind of information, that news back, a lot of veterans end up taking their lives. And they say there's 22 veterans that kill themselves every day on average. And I don't think this kind of news really helps them out that much. I took it to heart at first. But then, I learned more as I went on. I readdressed the issue again in 2023. So yeah, in 2023, I'm like, this can't be right. I'm kind of assessing myself with what I know, and my cohorts and friends and in arms that looking at their ratings and what they've been through, and just everyone that I talk to, they're like, I cannot believe that you're not rated for PTSD. You have to get that fixed. Talk to other veterans, tell them my story, like, wow, I can't believe, they denied your PTSD claims. So trying to follow some line of logic here, I later find out that, any licensed doctor can write you what's called a nexus letter. And the summer of 2023, I'm in between jobs right at about that point. I've got some money saved up. I think, I'm going to take the summer off and I'm going to work on my claim. And I'm going to get this straightened out. I disagree with what this doctor said, hey, you just don't have PTSD. But, if I'm going to solve a problem, I got to figure out, why the problem happened, and I finally got the VA after 10 years to give me a therapist that would allow me to talk about the war. And while I was there, I did get to talk to some other veterans. They were the ones that said, hey, yeah, your doctor can write you a nexus letter if they feel like your condition is severe, and that will get forwarded up to the Veterans Benefits Administration, and they'll review that, and they'll look at that heavily on their review decision. So I'm talking to this doctor, and I'm not gonna say that all VA veteran mental health individuals are not up to par for the task, but this mental health person was absolutely not. And this is on the mental health side. I wanted to convey my story, like, hey, look, I was getting bombs, I got blown up. Almost got blown up in Iraq. I was a machine gunner, yada, yada. And he would literally fall asleep in the middle of me telling this to him, and suggested that I get a job working at McDonald's. And I'm like, man, I'm 43 years old. It's going to be a tough pill to swallow to have some 20-something lording over me. And that I have a foot condition. And just the things that I was saying to him, it wasn't sinking in. The gravity of the weight of the circumstances and my immediate conditions weren't relevant. And we'd have virtual sessions, and I started smoking when I was 14, and it wasn't later until I started like, well, I'm going to have to pull my records from the VA, hospital. Maybe I have enough there to submit to the claims portion, that I was finding out that they were saying one thing and then writing up other things into my records report, like this individual has a chronic lung condition due to his smoking behavior, and that's coming from a mental health professional trying to rate me on a lung condition. That's how I don't know, it's how biased or stacked, like us versus the veterans vibe at this one smaller outstation from the VA. I later on got out of there and I found an extraordinarily awesome VA mental health professional who recently retired. So to give a benefit of the doubt, there are some really awesome people that do work in the VA. But it's kind of hit or miss, and I had to go to a whole other city to get to this individual. But on this trek for 2023, large language models are coming out, and why not have AI help me out on cutting the red tape on some of these tons and tons of form and bureaucracy that the VA has on its claims process, and have Chat GPT look at it and say, hey, what's my next course of action here, and it just zips through the federal statutes and the in-house VHA policy regulations. And I was really hoping that Mr. Sleepy VA doctor would write me a Nexus letter, and I actually drafted up a Nexus letter and put that together. I'm like, would you sign this for me? And he said, no, it's a conflict of interest. And then I have GPT look through all the doctrines, like he's actually required to produce documentation for you once you request it. So I'm kind of being gaslit here by my VA on false statements saying that it is a conflict of interest when it's absolutely not. But yeah, I ended up getting out of there. But, following this road along, I went back to the VES evaluator and looked him up, and I'm like, hey, what criteria did you use to say, this individual doesn't have PTSD, because it hurt, And while I was looking him up on Google Maps, I found out that I was not the only one. And I'll have a little clip here for you, showing you some of the reviews from this doctor. And it really feels like he's just, on one side, I understand that they're just stacked, and I know exactly why this is happening now. With these evaluations, they don't really have enough time to understand an individual to give that kind of diagnosis within 10 to 15 or 20 minutes of a face-to-face evaluation. Looking through these feeds, I found there was tons of posts from other veterans saying, this doctor is unfair. In lighter terms, you can read for yourself. And I kind of felt like there was this epidemic happening, and maybe it's just me, but it felt like it was happening more to my generation. There's this titrating down on veterans' benefits for war generation. And I understand if the nation's going broke and they don't want to pay for this. But if you're going to titrate down, you really can't titrate down on a generation of individuals that went to war. The war was long, it's 20 years long. And the first 10 years of it was some super intense fighting in Iraq. And then to see the older generations, in between the Vietnam generations, and all these DV plates all over the place. And that was part of the generation that this doctor was from. It kind of seemed like they were serving themselves and like, you know, like, we're in this for-profit mechanism and you're not getting it. Repeat back to the end of the line. And going in further into the process of asking for buddy letters and lay statements from my friends, I found out, you know, wow, like almost everybody that I called and talked to, like, I'm on my second divorce. You know, alcoholism is a big issue with veterans, you know, and they're like, oh, I can't remember anything. One of my friends shot up his whole house and like hid from the cops for like 3 days in the woods when he was having a PTSD episode. Another one of my friends was in the middle of an evaluation and lifted the table right up off of the ground and flipped it over. But like, it was the same story over and over. Like, yeah, I'm not doing good either, man. You know, I was hoping that like, hey, yeah, everything's going good. Another one of my buddies, like, yeah, I got rated at like 30%, and you know, he did 6 deployments, and he's got like rats living in his house, and I went out and helped clean up his situation. But it's like, wow, you know, like, how can this generation be hurting so bad? And to see this, I felt a necessity, like, leave no one behind. And with 22 veterans dying every day, like, the war is still continuing. And I did feel a grave injustice with this doctor, how he didn't look at my evaluations. Well, it didn't appear to, or my lay statements. And I submitted a FOIA request to figure out what his criteria was in determining, and the materials used to say I don't have PTSD. I thought that was a fair statement. And there was some back and forth that went along. And there was another thing that I wanted to add. I think the doctor at VES on the for-profit side kind of had a oh shit moment when I forwarded my evaluations to Maximus and VES. And that's when they really started to scramble. And that's probably the only reason why I got responses back from their senior leadership regarding the situation. They're trying to run a containment on the issue, but the issue is not contained. My family was threatened by this doctor from defamatory statements on my Google review, which I just felt like I needed to educate the public based on the service that he was providing to me. And why have a reviews tab if you're not going to use it? You know, I wanted to let these other veterans know, hey, you're not alone. I'm here with you, and I understand. You know, these rubber stamped evaluations without the proper processing for a multiple time combat veteran. It hurts. It really hurts. And it is killing us. And I did ask GPT, like, how much is this guy getting paid to rubber stamp no's on veterans, you know? GPT's like, do you really want to know? And maybe I shouldn't have found out, because I later found out a whole lot more about VES and Maximus. And there's a department in the U.S. government, the Secure Exchanges and Commodities, that monitors major transactions, like in the orders of magnitude of $1.4 billion. And I never found out exactly how much Dr. was making, but I did find out that there was a lawsuit in 2017, and I'll show you the lawsuit, where VES actually sued the federal government because they were losing the contract for veterans evaluations. And this is something that kind of spurred up in 2008 and was ballooned up during the Trump administration in 2016. And and Biden didn't do anything about it. Obama didn't do anything about it. And Bush exacerbated it. Well, not Bush, Trump exacerbated it. This for-profit veterans evaluations process. But like if you look at any major department store that's out there, like Walmart or Amazon, you know, or Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever, I think some of the other stores might not be the same, but they try to keep their workers in a state of perpetual emergency by having them low staffed and having these very large work output requirements. And getting back to the 2016 17-ish federal lawsuit with VES, they undercut their competitors by 30%. So they're saying these evaluations are going to cost 30% less with us, and you have to accept our contract. And they ended up winning the bid with a 30% undercut. I think their competitors are QTC. And you can see that in the lawsuit that was there. And so with a 30% cut, less money to do whatever they need to do, in 2021, VES sells out to Maximus. And I think this is a tell on of a lot of major large transactions that were happening post 2020. In 2020, everybody thought that the sky was falling and the world is going to come to an end. So the owner of VES, George Turek, which is an old school Vietnam era bomber fighter guy, we probably have a lot more in common than I think, sells out for $1.4 billion. So that's, even at a 30% cut rate, the valuation of this company on their gravy that they're taking in is $1.4 billion. And Maximus acquires VES and immediately does a clean sweep on the upper management, and they're gone. So they lose even more staffing on what they have to do. Now, the logic follows if you think about the Walmart type management strategy, or the Amazon or major department store strategy, you know. For them, if they have a failing system, it's actually a success, you know, because our claims don't get processed sufficiently. They get this play it again system, and it feeds on itself. They want to keep their consumer base large and repeat customers. Some documentation from the VES workers themselves at the call centers that aren't part of the medical treatment, that are part of the staff to organize and rack and stack all these evaluations. They're getting upset because they're feeling the squeeze too. And I've got a good chart here to kind of explain how the money streams are actually working, and why for-profit evaluations are a bad idea. You know, we have the base population here of about 350 million U.S. citizens that are paying $1.3 trillion in taxes. And how that tax money gets divvied up for the veterans, someone will say, hey, after Vietnam and the World War, I think World War II, they're like, we got to do something to take care of our combat vets when they come back. And that largely gets delegated by the head of the VA. And they set up a contract for $6.6 billion to go to this company called Maximus. Now, Maximus is one of the largest defense contractors in the entire world. They have a lot of defense contracts with Saudi Arabia as well. And, as per the documentation, they're making close to what their benchmarks were, $350 million a year off of the acquisition of VES. And they're putting a prize on our scalps pretty much with these dollars for evaluations, and they need to keep their consumer base stocked. So there's an incentivized program on the for-profit side for this repeat customer situation that you see here, and a lot of the other generations of veterans, they may have made it through before this for-profit system happened, but and I'm not saying that it was easy for them either. I talked to a Vietnam veteran that's still rated at 70%, but it does muddle the water when you put money on the evaluations process. So if they deny the claims, and kind of going back to 2023 for me, I emailed Maximus about this situation and VES, and they responded back to me. I actually emailed their chief financial officer, explaining like, how can we get accurate evaluations under the system and this overtaxed VES process. And I think that was at a great detriment to my final rating, because they initially hit me with then I was getting evaluated by QTC, VES, and Comp and Pen, all for PTSD, all at the same time. So they were nailing me and flooding me with paperwork. And some of the evaluators, I remember there was because the 2023 process, it took 2 years up until 2025 for me to finally get rated at 90%, but temporary unemployability, and I'm still not rated at 100%. But it was mixed. Some of the people evaluating me I literally had a woman get down on her hands and knees and start praying to me after she read my evaluation. She was Jewish. I don't think she gave me a bad eval. I think she actually understood what was going on, because I started labeling my evidence as, guided 915 bombs this year, wasted X amount of people. And then I got my awards up, dropped 50 more bombs over here on this little deployment and wasted more people. And I put wasted more people on the file description so people would actually have to understand what was inside of my records. And my records kept getting deleted over and over and over again. They hit the delete button, and then I have to scrounge up all this evidence again, hit the delete button, scrounge up all this evidence again. And I think I was evaluated for PTSD 5 times, but that's a big money maker for them to push me through this. And if I miss an evaluation, they still get paid, and that's a bonus for them, that they don't have to pay this soldier what I feel like I'm rightfully entitled to. If you have this process and you have these benefits that are available to veterans, and I kind of felt like I was being punished for sticking up for those veterans and myself that felt disgruntled about our evaluations process, which inevitably does have the potential for exacerbating the 22 phenomena of soldiers killing themselves. Oh, I'm not rated for this. I don't know how I'm going to make ends meet. Life has just always been bad. By the end of 2025, I had the police come out to my house 5 times, like 4 or 5 times, after calling 998, the suicide hotline, to check up on me. And even after that, they're like, oh, you don't have suicidal ideation enough. I wanted to die. I felt betrayed by my country. But getting back to the graph here a little bit, and then you have the in-house compensation and pension. There's no incentivized structure for a monetary gain of these repeat customers. And the individual that initially told me that I don't have PTSD from VES, he's living in one of the most affluent neighborhoods within the area. He's highly rewarded for this process. And this situation continues under the Trump administration. And, they're in the mindset, for profit, it's good.
But, they're soldiers.
And I'm telling you, it's not good for us. And that just tells me that you do not give a fuck about the soldiers.
But, they're soldiers.
I got to the point where I'm like, I have to take care of myself. I was completely out of money, completely exhausted. I'm still in a financial detriment, but like having to go to food banks, living off of just rice and spirulina powder, seaweed powder, like whatever I can get, a bulk bag of flour, and live off of that as long as I can, off of the rating that I was getting. And really, yeah, I called the White House, and then this happened through the Biden administration too. And I guided bombs for Obama and Bush. And, I thought, I'm at this point where I'm sharpening the talons of the entire nation's targeting capabilities and giving up all of the stuff and really giving up a big portion of my life. I'm going to reach out and contact you again and say, hey, this is happening and it's not right. I feel like there's retribution on me, because instead of just trying to sail through on my own, it's kind of had my arms out wide, because I'm looking out for my buddies that are getting torn to pieces on this process too. And it's not just a me issue, it's a system organizational issue that needs to be rectified. But it gets in the way of a lot of money here.
7,313 soldiers, to be somewhat exact. But, they're soldiers.
And, the Maximus leadership, they're really the winners off of this. They're getting all that tax money that's supposed to go to the soldiers for our evaluations, but it's really lining their pockets. And the documentation within the SEC, declares so. $1.4 billion of taxpayer money is a lot of money. And I think that money's being wasted on their affluent, self-serving processes. The for-profit evaluation system for veteran evaluations needs to go. It just has to go. What's happening to the generations of veterans is damning. And back to the main takeaways for the NexaVision. Yes, unity through clarity. It is time to look up. It's time to look up at these revenue streams. It's time to look at these key players that are lining their pockets with the taxpayers' money and figuring out who these decision makers are and how they're making things unfold. and their disregard for the base population. We do need to unite. We need to unite as soldiers, as veterans, as people. Say enough is enough. You know, we don't want this anymore. And we need to put pressure on our chambers of Congress, the lawmakers, and get better laws that represent the people and better leadership that can address a problem. I addressed this problem through the Florida Health Department, saying I have a grave concern about this rubber stamping of PTSD evaluations with this individual. And Senator Rick Scott did absolutely nothing about it. But I'm not very surprised, because he has been involved and with one of the largest Medicare fraud scandals in the history of the United States of America. Yes, we definitely need to look up. There's a lot of things happening up in those trees up there, and we need to get our stuff together and put pressure on the individuals as highlighted in these slides that I have provided, and say, hey, you know, this is getting my cohorts that I served with in war killed. There's more on Rick Scott and like the VA putting veterans on benzodiazepines and Baker acting them on as like a standard protocol procedure, and that actually resulted in the death of 2 Kissimmee police officers, which I consider a VA failure. I do not condone the violence against police officers, and I think that whole situation could have been avoided. But they find a rowdy individual, their 1-2 procedure is benzos and Baker Act. And then there has been a rash of that. And I have addressed that with Senator Rick Scott, and I've gotten no response back. And I told him, you know, I am losing sleep over this, because what's happening to our veterans right now, from at least from my generation, from what I can see, is a huge travesty. And the nullness, the just opening and closing of this public health request through the state of Florida has been very, very disheartening. It's hard for them to even actually say that they really care about veterans. Do you really care about veterans at all? Are we just a tool that's usable, and then once we're unusable, then we're just a liability, and if we say nothing and be quiet, that's excellent and good. Just load us up on benzos and Baker Act us away. I'll put some links on to some awful things that happened to some Marines within the state of Florida that I do have some grave issues with. But the next episodes are going to be a little bit more, I wouldn't say lighthearted, but in a positive light. I can't be focused too much on the negative here, but we do have to dig into the darkness if we want to get a real accurate trajectory on where we're heading and how we can do some course correction to make the world better for us. Thank you. I welcome you to the NexaVision, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.